Hello, welcome to today's CUGC User Share webinar. Today we're doing Ask Me Anything Security Edition. And I know that these have been a popular series in the past. Lots of people have been sending in questions. So we're excited to get to all the questions that you guys have sent in today and get them answered for you. But before we dive into those questions, I'd like to introduce who's on our call with us today. From Citrix, we have Martin Zugec and Pons Arun. I know that you've probably seen Martin at many of our CUGC Excel events and some of our regular CUGC meetings, so we're excited to have him on the webinar today. And Pons is a new face for us, so welcome, Pons. Glad to have you with us today. Also with us, I think, are some more familiar faces for you. We have Patrick Coble, Chris Rogers, Thorsten Rood, and Jason Samuel. All of these guys are CTPs and heavily involved with CUGC and definitely heavily involved in the security field. So I'm glad to have them on the call with us today. Patrick and Jason are actually going to MC a little bit for us today. So we did receive questions ahead of time, and we did pre-select some to be asked during the first portion of the webinar. So Patrick and Jason are going to go through those initially, and then we're going to open it up for more questions from the audience. So as you have questions, please type those into the question box, and we'll get to those as they make sense throughout. If they correlate to something that we're talking about at the moment, we'll try to slip those in. Otherwise, we'll save them all to the end. Also, just let you know, the presentation is being recorded and you'll receive a link to the recording via email probably sometime tomorrow. And finally, if you're going to tweet about us, please use the hashtag MyCUGC if you want to tweet about our session today or anything that you found out. We'd love to get some Twitter love for you, so make sure you use hashtag MyCUGC and follow us on Twitter. All right, I think with that, we can dive right in with our first question, and I will turn things over to Jason and Patrick to get us going.
All right, thank you, Stephanie. So our first question is, how do I keep users from running PowerShell commandlets, but still keep it enabled on a workstation? And the second part of that question is, how do you remove user access to a CMD or PowerShell prompt and still retain ability to run scripts within the user session, i.e. ControlUp? And this question is targeted toward Martin.
Yeah, so I can see that we are starting with a really tough questions, and this is the one that we see very often. I would say generally the recommendation is don't disable PowerShell, but I'm going to be a bit controversial here. I think if you are running managed environment, Citrix virtual apps and desktops, it is perfectly fine if you try to disable the command prompt or PowerShell, as long as it's not your only security defense that you are doing. So what I typically recommend when someone asks me about this is use some of the third-party tools to secure the access of executable. If you really want to go old school, you can set up NTFS permissions on all the executables on all the command prompts. Don't forget about the PowerShell ISE. The next recommendation that I usually make is be aware that many applications are using PowerShell under the hood. So if you have application written in C#, it's quite possible, especially if it's modern application, that it's also using the PowerShell. Final recommendation that I do have is if you are serious about the PowerShell security, what you want to look at is called the GEA concept, just enough administration. So what PowerShell allows you to do is that you can restrict permissions based on the time, just-in-time access, and you can also limit it based on capability access. So what you can do. And this is called GIA and JIT. And what you can also do, it's not very well documented by Microsoft yet. Hopefully we will see better documentation soon, is that you can create something called local just enough administration, where you can specify, for example, this specific user cannot run any PowerShell commandlets with exception of these few. So you can go on a very granular level in PowerShell where you specify what exactly can be executed by the user. It's kind of local sandboxing over the PowerShell. One last recommendation that I do here is for the script running, you also want to check the script signing, and if you can sign all the scripts and just change the execution policy to all signed, that's going to help you a lot. Not with an interactive session, but with the scripts downloaded from the internet and so on. So I hope that answers these questions. If you have any follow-up, just ask the question or discuss this in the chat later.
Excellent. Thanks, Martin. The next question is, during testing, we noticed that ControlUp reports lower login time for the same Citrix session than Citrix Director. Why? This question is directed toward Pons.
Right. It's a kind of a pretty short question. Yes, we are aware of this discrepancy because the logon duration is coming from the other component, Citrix user profile management software, and we are aware of this discrepancy, and it's getting addressed as we speak now. So you should be able to see these changes available in the next release, meaning the discrepancy will be addressed shortly.
Excellent. Thank you, Pons. Question number 3. What other solutions would you recommend to be layered on top of your Citrix environments that ensure stronger security? This question is directed toward Pons as well.
Sure, and it's unlike the previous question, it's a sort of a loaded question. So as you know, when we talk about the layered security, it has a long answer, so please bear me for today. So just to take a step back, right? So traditional security is all about protecting a local system. I mean, within the so-called network perimeter or whatever the perimeter you define yourself. And typically the perimeter includes layers of firewalls, IDS, IPS, and it goes on and on with multiple layers of security controls, right? If I may take a the common man analogy, it's like you're spending all of your time and money in securing your home by building taller fences, bars, and things like that. But bad guys have simply made a copy of your house key and they can simply walk right through your front door. So with that analogy set, so based on our experience, compromise of identity is the key threat vector for most of the data breaches that we happen to see these days. So do you know why? It's all because we are building our security strategy based on the wrong assumption that bad guys out and good guys in, right? But that's not right anymore, right? So hope you agree. So what we can do, right? That's specific to your to answer your question. Change your first line of defense to the user identity and privileges, right? The privilege is the currency of modern digital economy, digital transformation, right? That every threat vector, threat actors are worried of, are targeting these days, right? So that's the reason I would suggest, look for a risk-based analytical solution across access and activity risks that will help you to protect against the dynamic threats instead of depending on a kind of a static rule-based security controls, right? So specifically on that recommendation, Citrix Analytics probably is one of the best that you could think about it on the Citrix environment. Sorry for the long answer as well.
No, that's excellent, Pons. I see exactly that in the field. You can add as many layers as you want within a Citrix environment, but what I see most people doing is using identity as the perimeter, using that as one of the main things to shore up, because as you said, that is usually what gets compromised and can lead to other issues. And it basically, identity could potentially bypass some of those controls that you have in place because you assume that that person that is coming in is that person. So you need to definitely analyze that. So yeah, thank you. That's a perfect answer.
Sure.
All right, question number 4. What roles does Citrix play and how does it contribute in disaster recovery and disaster recovery planning? This question is directed toward Thorsten as well as anybody else on the panel.
Yeah, so let's start somewhere as a suggestion. To be honest, Citrix, in terms of contributing to disaster recovery, has never been provided anything in regards to ensure that the data is in the right state, right? So regardless of what you want to do in terms of disaster recovery, as long as there is no data at that location, it's practically worthless. So the Citrix role primarily is being an infrastructure delivery solution of making sure that you have the ability to get to your disaster locations. So, for example, you're no longer limited to have just a single site concept anymore. So having multiple sites and even running them active has become very popular with everything inside of Citrix products, starting from the way how you compose desktops, how you distribute them across certain silos, pods, or even clouds. It ranges up to the access tier. So speaking of things like GSLB or the intelligent successor technology that allows you to bring users to the right location. So this is primarily the thing that Citrix allows you to do. And on top of that, you need to provide a footprint where users can start with, so at least a workload. And composing a workload has never been easier than today, I would say, because you have any type of choice to deliver a layered or a provisioned image so that you can actually work. So except for the data replication piece, I would say Citrix has pretty much offering in here. So I would say if you do disaster recovery planning without the whole Citrix stack, you are really starting at the ground layer of really finding out what disaster recovery is. And so everybody has something to add here. What is your perspective on what disaster recovery is? Please feel free to add. Any of you other guys?
That's a great answer, Thorsten. Just, does anybody else on the panel want to add on that?
So maybe one day we will see Citrix buying also a data replication offering and add that to the suite. So then they will be actually completely a feature, delivering a whole feature. But as far as so far, they have a great infrastructure stack at least.
All right, excellent. All right, question number 5. What is a more secure VPN? Full IPsec or RA VPN, SSL or micro VPN? And this question is directed toward Thorsten as well.
Well, okay, so just continue here. This is something that actually goes to my heart, so thank you for the one to actually ask the question to us, because this is really the most loaded one in the fewest number of words, I would say, because it may be something like a comparing apples and oranges, right? You need connectivity. That's just the baseline. And connectivity is obviously related to the application scenario that you want to have access for. So it primarily depends on what the application expects in terms of transport and security to find its way home, wherever home actually is. And so depending on that maturity, what that application was built in the day it was created, you need different answers for that. So in an ideal world, the understanding of connectivity, security, and transport is baked into the application. This would qualify for a micro VPN answer because it simplifies a lot of surrounding things that happen on the same device where you run the application. However, reality says, as far as I'm working with customers, a lot of, I would call this legacy application deployment scenarios come into play, where in the design phase, transport and security was just assumed to be there. And later on, you find out when you mobilize your applications around the globe, transport and security becomes the hardest portion to ensure a closed audience, to protect your data, and to find out ways to prevent data leaks prevention events and stuff like that. So when that comes into play and you need to work around the fact that the application has been created without all these things in mind, it more translates back into a more full VPN technology, because that's the only way you can catch that up and provide the same functionality. So it is an either or eventually a together question. When I see my customers running around with their mobility stack, they leverage both of these, all of these things side by side. So it's more a per application decision. And in an ideal security world, you try to leverage micro VPN as most as possible, but don't make yourself a fool and think that Marco VPN is the only answer and it will satisfy 100% of your needs. So a loaded device with a wide variety of connectivity needs and a wide variety of application access needs has likely all of these things deployed and all these things being activated and run side by side, depending on where you want to go with that. And if you see that even the data is no longer just in a single location and is also traveling around different cloud locations or at least different sites, it is really likely that you have multiple connections being enabled that go out to different targets where actually the client sums them all up so that the user thinks he's working with just one combined application offering. But from a technology perspective, it's really like bonding certain connectivity down to an endpoint and making the user believe that this is the total sum of applications that he has access to. And this is kind of the security nightmare that we have to work with. We need to provide connectivity in various ways. And so the answer is you need them all.
Yeah, excellent answer, Thorsten. That's exactly what I'm seeing in the field personally. What you said is absolutely correct. Modern apps these days, it might not be the delivery and transport mechanism you have to worry about. You have to worry about the content, the source, and it could be coming from multiple clouds. You know, you have no idea if it's coming from your data center or somebody else's data center in some cases. So you're looking at things like cloud access security brokers, CASB. You're looking at DLP that's baked in at the location of the data, and applying conditional access there, contextual access policy there to prevent that data from being exfilled out. So you're spot on with that.
Yeah, perfect. Thanks for adding that.
All right, the next question. Question number 6. Is it moving forward for anyone?
Not yet.
Okay. Stephanie,
I did. It's not advancing for you. I'll pause and restart.
Yeah, it's not advancing for me, Stephanie. Maybe I'm far away from there, maybe.
We are still on Q5 for everybody, I would say.
Still on Q5. Oh, there it is.
Yeah, there you go.
A delay. Okay, there you go.
All right, question number 6. Which authentication protocol is strongest, OAuth or SAML? And this question is targeted at Martin.
Okay, so first of all, I would like to address one very common mistake, probably the most common one that I'm seeing. OAuth is not authentication protocol. OAuth is protocol used for authorization. When most people talk about OAuth as authentication, it usually means either old implementation that were kind of hacked, so that was definitely not a good idea to use them, or they are referring to OpenID Connect, OIDC, which is the new kind of recommended authentication protocol that we are using today. Now, but to answer this question, what I would like to say, and it's kind of a very simple argument where I can just do the make drop at the end. The last major revision of the SAML was in 2005, and 14 years in IT, that tells you how old the protocol is. So when it was developed, it was designed mostly for the web SSO, and that was a long time before we started having the smartphones or the IoT devices. OpenID Connect, the OIDC, that's the new standard in authentication that's being adopted as primary authentication method now by all the major players, the Microsoft, Google, Okta, and all the others. So if you can choose between OpenID Connect, the new authentication protocol that is based on the OAuth 2.0, or SAML, OpenID Connect would be my recommendation. It's newer, it covers a lot more, it's more secure, it covers many different kind of scenarios where you will really need to hack the SAML to actually work. The only disadvantage at this moment of the OpenID Connect is it's still very new. We are seeing it being adopted as a primary authentication protocol, but not everyone supports it. So if you can choose, use OpenID Connect. If no, just use the SAML still. So hope that answers the question.
Excellent recommendation, Martin. Thank you. That's spot on. That's what I'm seeing in the field as well. People prefer OpenID Connect, but if SAML is the only thing that particular thing they're trying to connect with supports, then that's much better than any of the alternatives. All right. Moving on to question 7. When do we shift away from MDM to an earned trust method of device management? This question is targeted toward Thorsten.
Okay, so MDM, that's the hard thing. I like the idea. I would like to give you a perfect answer in saying it's about like tomorrow. I see reality more in focus with that problem, because if we think about locking devices and controlling devices, especially when we target the iOS tier, it's not us making the rules here. It's actually Apple defining the game. And if you think about controlling an iOS endpoint from a technology perspective, the only way to get happy with the controls and to get confident that the exposure of data and the providing certain access capabilities is limited just to the scenario that you intend to deliver, MDM is the key component. And so getting rid of that, especially for that use case, has become harder than ever. If you see the Microsoft playbook in regards to O365 app deployment towards mobile devices using Intune, and the underlying technology tier that they use to, for example, ensuring a seamless, quick single sign-on for users, so that the interactivity on, for example, identity, which we talked about earlier, and I was thinking it was question 3 or so, and on usability, all this translates back into heavily usage of MDM technology to make sure that this device is working in the intended way from both a security perspective and also because of some ergonomic needs, which you only can realize when you go down the road with MDM. So when the mobility story was kind of reborn, I would say like 10 or 5 years ago, and the MAM story was pushed heavily forward, that felt like we could get away from these traditional technologies. However, as far as I'm seeing that, as long as we don't get Apple onboarded with that, they keep us locked in with that. It's not blaming them, it's just the way the technology works today and the devices work today. And then so I would just say make kind of freedom with that at least for the next 2 or 3 years, MDM is a key play when it comes to securing non-Windows endpoints, specifically iOS ones. On the Windows tier, it is a little easier because Windows allows you to have kernel drivers of any kind, even in a loosely coupled environment. iOS doesn't allow you to have any kernel controls, and so yeah, this is an answer with sadness, obviously, but you don't get away in the way the question is meant to be answered. Sorry for that. I don't see there any exit route.
Gotcha. Thank you. Thank you, Thorsten. Question number 8. With IE going away, where are you seeing enterprise customers going for a primary browser or browsers? How are they managing those browsers? And this question is directed toward Martin.
Yeah, so the IE is very slowly going away, especially from enterprises. So we still cannot say like it's disappearing. It's actually staying pretty stable for compatibility reasons. What we started seeing a lot for many companies is that they simply allow the end users to choose which browser they want to do. So they publish multiple browsers, which from security perspective, of course, it makes it much more challenging. What I'm seeing, the current primary browser is probably going to be the Google Chrome. And for the second question, how are they managing those browsers? We actually have a really good article on the TechZone, techzone.citrix.com. If you go to Build section, Tech Papers, We have one complete article written by Dennis Span about the Google Chrome and the management, how to install it, how to configure it, how to manage it. And a recommendation that we do here is to just use the policy management.
Excellent, Martin. That's exactly what I'm seeing in the field as well. A lot of people are using Chrome as the primary browser. You can manage it with GPO, and it actually is a modern browser that works. So perfect. Question number 9. What are your thoughts on recent isolation technologies? And this question is directed toward Martin too, I believe.
Yeah, I kind of, okay. So I'm not sure exactly. I'm assuming here the question is about the credential guard, device guard, the application guard, and all these latest isolation technologies in Windows operating system. And I have to say, on one hand, I'm definitely a huge fan, especially credential guard. It means that the types of attacks like the pass the hash are not possible, or at least much harder to do than before. On the other hand, as these isolation technologies will become more and more common, that definitely means that the attackers are going to find easy ways how to bypass these technologies. Again, the security, it's not a checkbox, it's a process, so it's continuous fight between attackers and defenders. And pretty much what I would also like to say, talking about application guard, for example, is this is protection only against the malware that is running within the browser, but it's not going to prevent you from the user downloading something and executing locally. That means you completely bypass the isolation. And what we are usually seeing is with the phishing attacks, it's actually the end user that is cooperating without knowing about it with the attackers. So what you want to do definitely is multi-layer defense. You want to make sure that you limit the privileges of the end users, and this should not be your only defense that you have today.
Excellent. Thank you, Martin. Completely agree with you. It's a layered approach. Question number 10. So regarding the recent security breach, what steps can be taken to protect against compromised code, specifically compromised NetScaler code? What message can Citrix customers state to our leadership and stakeholders regarding cybersecurity challenges and their associated business risks in light of the recent security breach on Citrix themselves? And this question is directed toward Pons.
Yeah, thank you. It's a pretty loaded question again, right? So like the way we updated in the public blog post from Citrix blog, we are devoting significant resources to manage this incident with thoroughness, because that's very important when you are troubleshooting a problem, right? Like a security incident. So we have brought onboarded multiple leading cybersecurity firms to assess the situation with our internal teams. So based on where we are, in the investigation at this moment, we have found no indication that the threat actors discovered and exploited any vulnerabilities in our products, like the way you are referring. And then the other observation so far, like based upon the investigation to date, there is no indication that the security of any Citrix product or service was compromised by the threat actors. And add to that, I want to highlight another thing. The investigation is ongoing, as you know, and I'm sure every security professionals understand that it is a complex and the dynamic process. At the same time, we as Citrix, we are committed to providing updates as soon as we have meaningful and accurate information for you to understand the incident. All right. I would strongly encourage you to go through the blog post from our leaders, Eric Armstrong and Stan Black. Both are available in the blog.citrix.com. That would help you to understand more insights about this specific question. Over to you, Jason.
Excellent. Thank you, Pons. So question number 11.
Oh, and I was going to share really quickly, Pons, I put a link in the chat window for everyone to the blog post that you were talking about.
Right.
Excellent. So question number 11, when will support for SSL v3, TLS 1, 1.1, and 1.2 be dropped, and why? And this question is directed toward Thorsten.
Well, I was about to answer, hasn't V3 already been dropped? But that's a different perspective. To be honest, the last 3 or 4 years have just proven that staying with an old standard is not a good idea per se. So SSL has many incarnations, and so the named abbreviations here are just incarnations of an ongoing evolution in the technology stack. V3 is really not needed for a long time now, and just by an accidental, it is still enabled in certain products. Technically, the whole Citrix portfolio is now capable of doing TLS 1.2 exclusively and upwards, on and on, so you could easily turn off the first 3 named ones. To my impression, even TLS 1.1 never had a major importance in the market space. You are now just moving from TLS 1.0 to 1.2 and leave out the intermediate. And it has been dropped just by all you remembering press releases. Heartbleed, Poodle, Beast, RC4, all these are just examples. What happens to you if you stick with an old protocol standard? It's just the nature of fact that when something becomes popular, people will onboard to the technology and try to temper whatever they can do with that, and that is just happening. It's just man-made technology, so it has errors. And moving forward, TLS 1.2 tries to prevent some of these downgrade capabilities that the previous ones all had. So when you were on, for example, TLS 1.0, you still had failback flaws in there that somebody could do some handshakes in an unwanted manner. So with TLS 1.2, there is a certain chance that we now have the ability to cut down backward compatibility from a technology perspective, not just by configuring. It's actually no longer there. And hopefully you all have upgraded to a kind of modern version of your receivers, workspace, apps, and whatever they all named like, including browsers, operating systems. And that also means you should no longer use XP, just saying that as a side comment to that. We need to go forward. So TLS 1.2 is the de facto standard. You can run your environment perfectly well today with standard client versions, nothing out of beta or whatever, that just work with TLS 1.2 over the whole stack. So browser, native clients, VPN, mobile clients, mobile operating systems, mobile browsers, Win 10, whatever. So as long as you don't have the need to support XP with an old IE, that question is kind of self-explaining why we need to go forward. But if you have XP with the old one, you still have a problem. But the problem is not staying with old protocols. You have a different one, and you need to fight against that, please.
Excellent. Thank you for that detailed answer, Thorsten. That's pretty much what I'm seeing in the field as well. 1.2 is what everybody is pretty much standardizing on. When I deploy a NetScaler or a gateway, or in this case, Citrix Gateway, as the new name is, you typically disable all these older protocols. You just leave 1.2, and it's pretty much sufficient for the wide user base. Outside of Citrix, just the Citrix ADC capability alone, the ADC was the first to actually support TLS 1.3, even in the early draft stages. And I've personally used it for a few number of websites, and it works very well. So that's something that we need to be looking at, forward thinking. 1.3 is an incredible leap over 1.2, in my opinion. I feel like it's almost a 2.0. If anything, if you really read, how secure it is and how it prevents a lot of those attacks that Thorsten mentioned.
Yeah, and because why it's more like a 2.0, as you are saying correctly, it will take us years from now before all the clients are capable of doing a 1.3 handshake. And that's just also another fact that we now have kind of a dual stack where you have at least 1.2 enabled, plus an additional offering of 1.3, depending on if your infrastructure is capable of doing that, like the already mentioned ADC, which speaks that now for a while. But if you look at your clients that connect to that environment, it's just a few browsers that now do TLS 1.3, and all the legacy other tools that connect into your environment, so apps, VPNs, and whatever, they will be stuck with 1.2 for a while, but they don't have to use anything lower than that, please.
Yep. Excellent. Thank you, Thorsten. Okay, question number 12. With the way RDP protocol can be attacked, how vulnerable are Citrix communication protocols? And then the second part of that question is, how should you secure against threats to and from mobile devices and their effect on your network and Citrix environment? And this question, who's this directed towards, Stephanie?
It's Nathan.
Nathan, oh. Nathan's not on, Patrick, so it's...
It'd be Chris today.
Yeah,
I think Chris.
Oh, Chris, okay.
That's me. So interestingly, we have already answered this question, in a lot of ways. Really just going a little bit more on what Thorsten just said, any protocol is vulnerable to attack, be it RDP, be it Citrix, be it HDX, be it whatever, if it's not encrypted. And you should be encrypting your network traffic, not only internally, but also externally. Pons very capably said that a little bit earlier, in the fact that threat actors are not only external, they're internal as well. So that's the idea of end-to-end encryption, and the fact that not only should your traffic coming into your network be encrypted, but traffic within the network should be encrypted as well. I would direct you to a white paper. I actually have the link right here. I'll post it in the chat. Co-authored by none other than Martin Zugec. Pop that in there. There we go. Which is performing end-to-end encryption on your XenApp and XenDesktop environment. The bottom line, really, for all of that is making sure that you are encrypted at all places at all times. So, and even then, talking a little bit more about what Thorsten just said, make sure you have the right encryption in place, TLS 1.2, secure ciphers, things like that. So make sure that you take steps to secure all of your protocols, not just RDP, not just Citrix, but all of your protocols. The second part of the question, how should you secure against threats to and from mobile devices and their effect on your network? Well, you use some sort of mobile device management. Citrix has a product. There are other products I'm sure that lots of people use as well. But don't be quite so complacent that those products are going to do everything that they think that you think they're going to do for you, because there still does need to be a human in the mix making the decision, intercepting the call that says, hey, I lost my mobile device. Oops, okay, well, we have to go into our device manager, we have to disable it, we have to wipe it, we have to do whatever our protocol calls for. But how long has elapsed between when the device was lost or stolen versus when it got reported versus when it was actioned upon? So, that can be hopefully minutes, probably hours, maybe days, in which case, if the device was stolen by a malicious individual, days is all they need to do all kinds of damage. So your mobile device management, your threats on mobile device are only as good as your user training and the ability of those users to not only report, but to have action taken against those devices. So some sort of mobile device management is really, really important, but make sure it is well administered.
Excellent, thank you, Chris. Yep. At the end of the day, the users are the biggest risk, and it's not really the devices, as you say. It's what the user, what the user does and how you as IT react to it. So that's perfect. From here, if anybody in the audience has any questions, please do feel free to drop them into the chat window for us, and we as a panel will answer those. And in the meantime, I think the next slide, Stephanie, you wanted to cover a few things happening?
Sure. Let me get on the right screen. Just while you guys are coming up with your questions, just a reminder that we did open registration for the CUGC pregame at Synergy. We hope everyone who's coming to Synergy will certainly attend. So just come to mycugc.org and you can click on the banner at the top of the page and RSVP. It's always a good time, so hopefully you guys can make it in. And then just a quick look ahead at some of the webinars that we have coming up. Next week we have Liquidware taking a look at FlexApp, and we have ControlUp on May 1st. And Women in Tech are doing another webinar on May 8th and talking about personal brand and elevating your career. So hopefully you can join one of those, take a look at the calendar at mycgc.org, and you'll find all the information that you need for those. And that is what I have. So I can't believe, has anyone sent in any questions?
Nope, there hadn't been any in.
Everybody knows everything they need to know.
It was all the perfect questions and all the perfect answers.
Well, that's what you want to hear. Well, all right. If we have
maybe Stephanie, maybe the closing thoughts. Being a security session, I want to have a kind of a closing thought. So we are talking about all the complex technologies and protocols. You know, if you see most of the breaches and most of the security, the security incidents being talked on the industry, you know, security is not about stopping the unknown or doing the cool things. So it is very specifically about doing the basic things really well. So go back to our security governance strategy, make sure that the basics are very well adopted, and make sure that you validate that, and then make sure to decide what you can, what you cannot do with respect to the basics. And a lot of times we talk about the basics like the least privileges. That's a kind of fundamental. That's the key thing that you could continue to see in a lot of breaches, right? Jason talked about it, like identity is being the kind of key exploitable target always, because without the privileges, no one can do anything, even if they could compromise your perimeter, right? So make sure that you follow the basics and don't trade off the security basics for any the cool things, right? Let me put it that way.
Yeah, I'd agree to that. I think one thing that everyone should be looking for is, if anyone follows Carl Webster, but his AD documentation script is a great thing to run to see how bad your privileged access really is, because you're going to see who's a member of domain admin, and then also people that haven't changed their password in days, weeks, months, or years. A lot of security audits that I do, I found domain admin accounts that haven't had passwords changed in 10 and 15 years. So what that means is someone can be there for that long. And when we talk about password reuse, so it means everybody using the same password for Amazon, Facebook, Twitter, Insta, this and that and that, and then using that same password or just a very slight increment for your work is now become your problem. So someone's bad personal password management becomes a big problem for your business password management. So make sure and look at your privileged access, see who's in domain admins. Most people are always surprised when they actually look at that, but then make sure you're looking at enterprise schema and the built-in administrator groups. Those 4 groups are pretty much core to hackers like me and a couple others on here. That's the way that we're able to exploit and get into people's environments and do stuff like that. So privileged access is very important, and those password reuse is on the personal side hurts us on the business side.
Right. So if I may add to that, one more thing on the similar context, irrespective of whether the the threat vector, whether he's a hacker or attacker, or the threat actors funded by the national agencies, at the end, everyone wants to hunt for the path to least resistance in your attack surface, because that's a kind of common thing, right? Irrespective of their motives. But be clear, like they cannot do anything malicious unless they get access to one or the other identity. So let me reiterate again, like Patrick mentioned, make sure that you have enough focus on the basics. Again, I'll repeat the security basics on the privileges. So it's all about the basics first, and don't ever let the basics to be compromised for any new security spendings. That's my closing thoughts.
That's an excellent point, Pons and Patrick both. I see a lot of companies adopting PAM solutions, privileged access management, password vaulting solutions like CyberArk, Thycotic, there's tons out there. And that's one way to handle those privileged accounts, especially where if the user doesn't know the credential, and if the credential is constantly changing, they have to check in and check out. That's one method of being able to control some of that. The other thing that I'm seeing quite a bit in the industry now is a big shift to modern passwordless authentication solutions for the end users, so that the users don't even know their password. Traditionally, we've done this with certificates. We've used X509 certificates through smart cards and PIV and CAC and some other industries. This is now being modernized to where you can have a strong device-based credential, but it can be on your phone, for example.
Yep, I'd agree.
Yep, there's a number of things out there. I mean, a phone, there's hardware security keys available now, things like YubiKey, for example. It's another popular one that I'm seeing. But there is a big shift now to be able to support some of the modern auth protocols, such as FIDO2, which is gaining traction. There is NFC support coming for Apple devices and FIDO2 from what I'm reading, but it's still rather young. But I see a big shift toward this to just Windows logins in general, this and things like Windows Hello for Business and so on. So yeah, identity is definitely one of those key pieces that we need to continue looking forward toward.
Right, and I think that's where like analytics and things like that can shine. Just help spot anomalous behavior, right? When someone's doing something they've never done before and they have a good username and password, but they start doing something that doesn't look right, instead of having a passive defense where it's just sent off to a syslog server and maybe someone will read it in the SIM or your SOC, at least it can do an active defense. So someone can actually help protect it. So that's where Citrix really shines, is kind of their layered security. So, and making sure you also have MFA, because I know Thorsten and Jason and Chris, all of us, and Martin and Pons, all of us talk about MFA all the time. And it's a great way to do it. And sometimes workflow doesn't work for it for all use cases, but trying to use it as much as possible with those back to basics, like Pons keeps reiterating, is the key to help trying to make your deployment more secure.
Absolutely. Yeah, it's all about user behavior analytics, trying to figure out what's out of spec, what's out of norm for that particular user. You start seeing them, download a ton of files off of your file shares. Something is going on. Either that's an insider threat, or that's them about to leave the company to go join another company and taking all the company data with them, or it could be somebody's compromised them and it's literally somebody exfilling your data. So there's a lot of noise these days that goes to the SOC. As soon as you see something like that, you don't want to just send that event off. Maybe that is normal behavior. Maybe it's a analyst that sits there and generates large reports and does that all day long. You don't want to send that noise to the SOC. You want to see something that's out of spec for that particular user and send that up, and also take automated action upon that. And that's one of the things that Citrix Analytics can do, where it can see things within the ecosystem, fingerprint a user and say, hey, that user shouldn't be able to log in anymore because we're seeing several things that they're doing that are way out of spec, and you can lock that person out potentially, right? So I see that really advancing over the next few years, the Citrix Analytics story. And Pons, I don't know if you want to chime in on that one.
That's right. That's right. And again, I always prefer to make the security story as simple as possible, even though we complicate the things with a lot of technology stacks, like a defense in, defense in depth. But I would put the security in a completely a simple way, right? It's all about the subjects and objects. And subject is trying to have a relationship with the objects, and the relationship, it's all about the access and activity, right? The entire threat landscape, what you're talking about these days, it's all about the anomalous behavior with access and activity. Hope you all agree, right? So either the access could be a legitimate access or illegitimate access, or the activity could be expected activity or the suspicious activity, right? That's all. So make sure that you have a visibility into your subjects, objects, and make sure that you monitor closely with the access behaviors and the activity behaviors, right? That's all. So make sure that you don't miss the, you don't ignore the basics. That's what I would reiterate again. Jason?
Excellent. Excellent. And we have a question from the audience. How do you feel about biometric-based security solutions? Are they really secure? And this is an open question to anybody on the panel. I just want to say that, yes, in my opinion, they are secure. I see more people moving away from PIN codes and passcodes and instead going to biometrics. But there's a challenge there, because when you trust a vendor to use a biometric, you have to understand how that data is being stored, because if the vendor gets compromised, that data is floating out there. And unlike a security key or a certificate or something that IT can swap out, you can't swap out somebody's thumb. You can't swap out their face, or whatever biometric they're using.
You can.
Okay, with a lot of work, you may be
Tom Cruise was able to do that a couple times on some movies, so it seems legit.
Yeah, it's impractical to do it too often.
Yeah.
Yeah.
The facial recognition is my personal favorite on biometrics because it's 7 unique numbers and it's based on the bone structure of your face and those 7 numbers are unique to every single person. Now, that also being said, looking at the data, strictly speaking, while you would not be able to duplicate the bone structure of a face very easily, very repeatably, you could get into that system and duplicate those numbers. So that's another thing where, not only is the system you're using, the methodology you're using secure, but the system it's sitting on has to be secure with the data and the business logic and things like that.
Yeah, I also like to use biometric data a lot. The only 2 quick notes I would like to make. First of all, I like to use it if it's used locally only, so unlocking the device, but I'm not a big fan if it's stored somewhere in a centralized location, as Patrick was saying before. Second quick note I would like to mention here, and that's maybe transition to Pons, is the biometric data is authentication factor that is based on something that you are. But it's also kind of virtual biometric data, which is specifically the user behavior. And that's extremely interesting for analytics, where you can use this as potential authentication factor. If I see that you behave digitally the way how you typically behave, then I can let you into use some system. So I see a lot of potential in this kind of virtualized biometric identity.
That's right, Martin. And at the same time, we should also think about a kind of a privacy concerns that we likely to face, right? That's a kind of a different topic altogether, but security, it's not something you can, split the governance and the compliance outside of a conversation, right? So that could be one of the challenge that we might end up solving it. It's not a technical challenge. Rather, it's a kind of a federal regulation related challenges. So that we need to be bothered, or we need to be cautious about it.
Yep, absolutely. Especially if as Martin was saying, if it's localized and you're using it just for local access to something, and you're not actually sending that over the wire, that's I think a lot more easier for people to consume. But as Chris was bringing up as well, the metadata, the storage of some of this on the backend systems, how are those stored, and the governance behind that, like you were saying, Pons, that's a real question. That's what I would have concerns about or keep me awake at night. And if we have any other questions coming in, I don't think there's any additional ones.
No, it looks like not. So we can wrap up. All right, well, I want to thank everyone for being on the panel today, and really appreciate you guys being willing to take any question and come up with an answer. It was awesome of you, and thanks for sharing your time. And thank you to all the attendees. Glad you could make it out today, and thanks for submitting your questions ahead of time. I know we didn't get to all of the questions that were sent in, but we did get to the ones that we thought were the biggest, and there were some duplicates in there. So we definitely, there is one question that I did not put on a slide, and it was directed at Patrick, and it was about your book. So someone was wondering how it was coming along and when we could expect it. So I don't know, Patrick, if you want to make a quick comment about that.
Yep. It should be ready to shake and bake come Synergy. So I'll probably bring some copies with me and do the song and dance there. I've got some presentations if you look on the Synergy thing there. And then I'll probably just be around the Citrix user group booth a whole lot. So if you want to come over there, I'll be there and be able to give it to you, and you'll be able to have a good day. So it was a lot more work than I thought it was, and it still is a lot more work to go. So, but it's great.
Awesome, looking forward to it. All right, thank you, everyone. Again, you'll get a link to the recording from today in an email tomorrow. And otherwise, I hope everyone has a really great rest of your day. And thanks again to all the panelists. Really appreciate you taking the time and being here today. And thank you, Jason, for emceeing and reading all those questions and handling all that business of the webinar. I appreciate that. All right, everyone, I hope you have a great day, and we will see you at a future mycudc.org event, and hopefully at Synergy. Come see us at our booth. Bye.
Bye-bye.